Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Raven's Readings. I'm reading from Sunshine Sketches of a Little Town by the Canadian humorist Stephen Leacock. He wrote this in 1912 as an imaginative and ironic portrayal of Mariposa. It's a fictional small town in Canada, modeled after Orillia, Ontario, where he spent many summers. I do readings twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. If you subscribe to my Substack newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoyed this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. Last time, shots rang out and we left Pupkin lying motionless on the bank floor. Let's check in on him again. Chapter 9. The Mariposa Bank Mystery, Part 2. By 7:30 on the following morning, it was known all over Mariposa that Peter Pupkin, the junior teller of the exchange, had been shot dead by a bank robber in the vault of the building. It was known also that Gillis, the caretaker, had been shot and killed at the foot of the stairs, and that the robber had made off with $50,000 in currency, that he'd left a trail of blood on the sidewalk, and the men were out tracking him with bloodhounds in the great swamps to the north of the town. This, I say, and it is important to note it, was what they knew at 7:30. Of course, as each hour went past, they learned more and more. At 8 o'clock, it was known that Pupkin was not dead, but dangerously wounded in the lungs. At 8:30, it was known that he was not shot in the lungs, but the ball had traversed the pit of his stomach. At 9 o'clock, it was learned that the pit of Pupkin's stomach was all right, but that the bullet had struck his right ear and carried it away. Finally, it was learned that his ear had not exactly been carried away, that is, not precisely removed by the bullet, but that it had grazed Pupkin's head in such a way that it had stunned him, and if it had been an inch or two more to the left, it might have reached his brain. This, of course, was just as good as being killed from the point of view of public interest. Indeed, by 9 o'clock, Pupkin could be himself seen on the main street with a great bandage sideways on his head, pointing out the traces of the robber. Gillis, the caretaker, too, it was known by 8, had not been killed. He had been shot through the brain, but whether the injury was serious or not was only a matter of conjecture. In fact, by 10 o'clock, it was understood that the bullet from the robber's second shot had grazed the side of the caretaker's head, but as far as could be known, his brain was just as before. I should also add that the first report about the blood stains on the swamp and the bloodhounds turned out to be inaccurate. The stains may have been blood, but as they led to the cellar way of Netley stored, they may also have been molasses, though it was argued to be sure that the robber might well have poured molasses over the bloodstains from sheer cunning. It was remembered, too, that there were no bloodhounds in Mariposa, although, mind you, there are any amount of dogs there. So you see that by 10 o'clock in the morning, the whole affair was settling into the impenetrable mystery in which it ever since has remained. Not that there wasn't evidence enough. There was Pupkin's own story and Gillis's story and the stories of all the people who had heard the shots and seen the robber. Well, some said the bunch of robbers go running past. Others said walking past in the night. Apparently, the robber ran up and down half the streets of Mariposa before he vanished. But the stories of Pupkin and Gillis were plain enough. Pupkin related that he heard sounds in the bank and came downstairs just in time to see the robber crouching in the passageway, and the robber was a large, hulking, villainous-looking man wearing a heavy coat. Gillis told exactly the same story, having heard the noises at the same time, except that he first described the robber as a small, thin fellow, peculiarly villainous-looking, however, even in the dark, wearing a short jacket. But on thinking it over, Gillis realized that he'd been wrong about the size of the criminal, and that he was even bigger, if anything, than what Mr. Pupkin thought. Gillis had fired at the robber just at the same moment had Mr. Pupkin. Beyond that, all was mystery, absolute and impenetrable. By 11 o'clock, the detectives had come up from the city under orders from the head of the bank. I wish you could have seen the two detectives as they moved to and fro in Mariposa. Fine-looking, stern, impenetrable men that they were. They seemed to take in the whole town by instinct, and so quietly. They found their way to Mr. Smith's hotel just as quietly as if it wasn't designed at all, and stood there at the bar, picking up scraps of conversation. You know the way detectives do it. Occasionally, they allowed one or two bystanders, Confederates perhaps, to buy a drink for them, but you could see from the way they drank it that they were still listening for a clue. If there had been the faintest clue in Smith's Hotel or in the Mariposa House or in the Continental, those fellows would have been at it like a flash. To see them moving round the town that day, silent, massive, imperturbable, gave one a great idea of their strange, dangerous calling. They went about the town all day, and yet in such a quiet, peculiar way you couldn't have realized they were working at all. They ate their dinner together at Smith's Cafe and took an hour and a half over it to throw people off the scent. Then when they got them off it, they sat and talked with Josh Smith in the back bar to keep them off. Mr. Smith seemed to take to them right away. They were men of his own size, or near it, and anyway, hotel men and detectives have a general affinity and share in the same impenetrable silence and in their confidential knowledge of the weaknesses of the public. Mr. Smith, too, was of great use to the detectives. "Boys," he said, "I wouldn't ask too close as to what fellows were out late at night. In this town, it won't do." When those two great brains finally left for the city on the 5:30, it was hard to realize that behind each grand, impassible face, a perfect vortex of clues was seething. But if the detectives were heroes, what was Pupkin? Imagine him with his bandage on his head, standing in front of the bank and talking about the midnight robbery with that peculiar false modesty that only heroes are entitled to use. I don't know whether you've ever been a hero, but for sheer exhilaration, there's nothing like it. And for Mr. Pupkin, who had gone through life thinking himself no good, to be suddenly exalted into the class of Napoleon Bonaparte and John Maynard and the charge of the Light Brigade, it was wonderful. Because Pupkin was a brave man now, and he knew it, and acquired with it all the brave man's modesty. In fact, I believe he was heard to say that he had only done his duty, and that what he did was what any other man would have done, although when somebody else said, "Oh, that's so when you come to think of it," well, Pupkin turned on him that quiet look of the wounded hero, bitterer than words. And if Pupkin had known that all the afternoon papers in the city reported him dead, he would have felt more luxurious still. That afternoon, the Mariposa court sat in inquiry. And technically, it was summoned an inquest on the dead robber, though they hadn't found the body. And it was wonderful to see them lining up the witnesses and holding cross-examinations. There's something in the cross-examination of great criminal lawyers like Nivens of Mariposa and in the counter-examinations of presiding judges like Pepperley that thrills you to the core with the astuteness of it. They had Henry Mullins, the manager, on the stand for an hour and a half, and the excitement was so breathless that you could have heard a pin drop. Nivens took him on first. "What is your name?" he said. "Henry August Mullins." "What position do you hold?" "I am manager of the Exchange Bank." "When were you born?" December 30th, 1869. After that, Nivens stood looking quietly at Mullins. You could feel that he was thinking pretty deeply before he shot the next question at him. "Where did you go to school?" Mullins answered straight up, "The high school down home." And Nivens thought again for a while and then asked, "How many boys were at the school?" "About 60. "How many masters?" "About 3. After that, Nivens paused a long while and seemed to be digesting the evidence, but at last an idea seemed to strike him, and he said, "I understand you were not on the bank premises last night. Where were you?" "Down the lake, duck shooting." You should have seen the excitement in the court when Mullins said this. The judge leaned forward in his chair and broke in at once. "Did you get any, Harry?" he asked. "Yes," said Mullins, "about 6. "Where'd you get them?" "What? In the wild rice marsh past the river?" "Well, you don't say so. Did you get them on the sit or how?" All of these questions were fired off at the witness from the court in a single breath. In fact, it was the knowledge that the first ducks of the season had been seen in the Ossawippi Marsh that led to the termination of the proceedings before the afternoon was a quarter over. Mullins and George Duff and half the witnesses were off with shotguns as soon as the court was cleared. I may as well state at once that the full story of the robbery of the Bank of Mariposa never came to the light. A number of arrests, mostly of vagrants and suspicious characters, were made, but the guilt of the robbery was never brought home to them. One man was arrested 20 miles away at the other end of Mississauga County, who not only corresponded exactly with the description of the robber, but in addition to this, had a wooden leg. Vagrants with one leg were always regarded with suspicion in places like Mariposa. Whenever a robbery or murder happens, well, they're arrested in batches. It was never ever known just how much money was stolen from the bank. Some people said $10,000, others more. The bank, no doubt for business motives, claimed that the contents of the safe were intact and that the robber had been foiled at his design. But none of this matters to the exaltation of Mr. Pupkin. Good fortune, like bad, never comes in small installments. On that wonderful day, every good thing happened to Peter Pupkin at once. The morning saw him a hero. At the sitting of the court, the judge publicly told him that his conduct was fit to rank among the annals of the pioneers of Tecumseh Township and asked him to his house for supper. At 5 o'clock, he received the telegram of promotion from the head office that raised his salary to $1,000 and made him not only a hero, but a marriageable man. At 6 o'clock, he started up to the judge's house with his resolution nerved to the most momentous step of his life. His mind was made up. He would do a thing seldom if ever done in Mariposa. He would propose to Zena Pepperleigh. In Mariposa, this kind of step, I say, is seldom taken. The course of love runs on and on through all its stages of tennis playing and dancing and sleigh riding, till by sheer notoriety of circumstance, an understanding is reached. To propose straight out would be thought priggish and affected, and is supposed to belong only to people in books. But Pupkin felt that what ordinary people dare not to do, heroes are allowed to attempt. He would propose to Zena, and more than that, he would tell her in a straight, manly way that he was rich and take the consequences. And he did. That night on the piazza, where the hammock hangs in the shadow of the Virginia creeper, he did it. By sheer good luck, the judge had gone indoors to the library, and by a piece of rare good fortune, Mrs. Pepperleigh had gone indoors to the sewing room, and by a happy trick of coincidence, the servant was out, and the dog was tied up. In fact, no such chain of circumstances was ever offered in favor of mortal men before. What Zena said, beyond saying yes, I do not know. I'm sure that when Pupkin told her of the money, she bore up as bravely as so fine a girl as Zena would, and when he spoke of diamonds, she said she would wear them for his sake. They were saying these things and other things, ever so many other things, when there was such a roar and a clatter up Oneida Street as you never heard, and there came bounding up to the house one of the most marvelous limousine touring cars that ever drew up at the home of a judge on a modest salary of $3,000. When it stopped, there sprang from it an excited man in a long sealskin coat, worn not for the luxury of it all, but from the sheer chilliness of the autumn evening, of course. And it was, as you know, Pupkin's father. He had seen the news of his son's death in the evening paper in the city. They drove the car through, so the chauffeur said, in 2 hours and a quarter, and behind them there was to follow a special trainload of detectives and emergency men, but Pupkin Sr. had canceled all that by telegram halfway up when he heard that Peter was still living. For a moment, as his eye rested on young Pupkin, you would almost have imagined, had you not known that he came from the Maritime Provinces, there were tears in them, and he was about to hug his son to his heart. But if he didn't hug Peter to his heart, he certainly did within a few moments clasp Zena to it, in that fine, fatherly way in which they clasp pretty girls in the Maritime Provinces. The strangest thing is that Pupkin Sr. seemed to understand the whole situation without any explanations at all. Judge Pepperleigh, I think, would have shaken both of Pupkin Sr.'s arms off when he saw him, and when you heard them call one another Ned and Philip, made you feel that they were boys again attending classes together at the old law school in the city. If Pupkin thought his father wouldn't make a hit in Mariposa, it only showed his ignorance. Pupkin Sr. sat there on the judge's veranda smoking a corncob pipe as if he'd never heard of Havana cigars in his life. In the 3 days that he spent in Mariposa that autumn, he went in and out of Jeff Thorpe's barber shop and Elliot's drugstore, shot black ducks in the marsh, and played poker every evening at 100 mats just for a cent, as if he'd never lived any other life in all his days. They had to send him telegrams enough to fill a satchel to make him come away. So Pupkin and Zena, in due course of time, were married and went to live in one of the enchanted houses on the hillside in the newer part of town, where you may find them to this day. You may see Pupkin there at any time, cutting enchanted grass on a little lawn, in as gaudy a blazer as ever. But if you step up to speak to him or walk with him into the enchanted house, pray modulate your voice a little, musical though it is, for there is said to be an enchanted baby on the premises, whose sleep must not lightly be disturbed. End of chapter. Well, that was a relief. Nobody was really hurt, and Pupkin is a hero and a new father. And that spread of small-town rumors is a lot like social media now. If you subscribe to my newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoy this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. Check out my other posts on my Substack at ravensview.substack.com, and remember to share this with your friends. Ta-ta for now.